Welcome, MUT 213, Wednesday, January the 31st, 2018. You know what's special about today?
Nothing.
Is it your birthday?
No.
Dave?
That's not special. Just missed my comment.
Just like that.
Payday.
Oh.
Payday?
This is why we're here.
For you?
Payday.
I thought it was last Friday.
End of the month. I'm a monthly person.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Okay, I did grade your paper, so expectations met.
Is that good? Is that
First, we're gonna do
partner?
for the camera
Smile.
Is it on?
fits, and we're gonna approach one other thing about fits that sort of made it why we don't consider it direct fits if you move by step in the upper voice. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Okay. So consider this in the key of C. Okie smoky. Now, this would certainly be a common progression, or I shouldn't say progression so much as melody. 3, 2, 1, right? 3 blind mice. There's other tunes that use those 3 notes also. Okay, so if you were gonna do, okay, this comes back to what we're talking about now, and it's called horn fifths, okay? And it comes from French horns.
Yeah.
Okay? In the olden times, back in the 50s, the horns didn't have valves. They were just natural horns.
Yep.
And so they only played the harmonics of the length of the pipe. So basically, to understand harmonics is if you had a string, that's the fundamental when it vibrates at its full length. So pretend, I can't do it on an electronic piano, it has to be a real piano, but maybe one day we'll have a field trip to see a real piano. Okay, also if you touch that string in the middle, it vibrates at that frequency too. So now I'm going to use the word partial and the word harmonics. The thing is, they mean the same thing, but it's a little confusing in that we think of the fundamental and the harmonics above it. But when we think about partials, we think of the fundamental as the first. Okay? So pretend we had, let's take a very low note, and we'll do C just because. Okay, that would be partial 1 or the fundamental. Okay? The next partial is the octave, 2. Now, anytime you have a 2-to-1 relationship, it's an octave in music, okay? So if you tune to A440, octave below that's 220 in the top of the bass clef. Octave above it would be twice 440. 80. Indeed. Sweetie. Okay. Now the next thing is the fifth. That's partial 3. Okay, now there is this 3-to-1 relationship to the fundamental, correcto? And there's a 3-to-2 relationship between the second and third partial. Does that make sense? So what does this mean? This is the way the ancient Greeks determined the notes of a scale. And we've sort of messed around with tuning systems ever since we had things to tune. All right, what would you suspect, given, oh, that was on camera, wasn't it?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, at least it's on today.
No one watches, that's the beauty.
I actually watch it.
Well, let's do some fundamental modern dancing.
Yes.
You're gonna see that at some point. I like the modern dance where they pretend to get off balance, but in reality they're off balance. You know, because when you balance, you do have a little shakiness, right? You know, just all that kind of stuff. If you really want to challenge your balance, just close your eyes and balance. Now, what this is really good for is it really helps your feet and your ankles just recover from all the sprains and breaks and torn Achilles and things like that you've had. Okay, what would you guess? I've already told you 2-to-1 represents an octave. The next partial is 4. What the hell is the note going to be?
Third. Fourth.
What's the 4th partial going to be?
A third.
If everything that is doubled is an octave, what's 2 times 2?
4.
What is 2 in this graph? The note
C.
C. So what's 4 going to be?
C.
Did you see how easy that was?
I think so. It's not like.
Oh my goodness! All right, now we start getting into the a little bit more strangely tuned stuff. 5 is E. You should be able to tell me what 6 is right now.
G.
That's right.
Bingo.
Oh gosh, remnants of green part writing. What's with the kids today? Aye. Now, there is no 7-to-1 relationship here, so we actually need a new note. And that is a little bit out of tune, B flat. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, what happens in the natural horn is you start playing these notes up here, so you're not using any valves, but yet you're still getting some step situations, and that'd be the worst step dancer, wouldn't that? That would absolutely be the worst. I could rock the hat though. Okay, so wait, we need numbers 5, 6, 7. What's 8 gonna be? You can do this. You can do this.
B.
D.
D.
No, C. No, yes.
C.
I was right.
C. C. Everything times 2 is an octave, right? 1, 2, 4, 9. No, 8. You know, an 8 you turn it sideways,
Infinity.
is infinity. It's always been my belief that you should carry a sideways 8 in your wallet, like it's a infinity sign.
Why?
Well,
That's whatever.
if there's anything you kind of want to look to achieve is infinity in the wealth side, right? You don't believe me, do you? Okay.
Oh, no.
If this man pulls a sideways 8 out of his wallet.
Well, I told you I was, right? Come on, you can do it.
Oh.
It shows deterioration too.
This man planned this morning.
And you want to know something else? I have never wanted. For
So laughed.
things. Okay, so 8's gonna be a C! Alright, anybody want to go 9? It's a D.
This is big.
Because we don't really have a 9-2 something relationship until, oh gosh, that's gonna be too hard.
E.
Alright,
10,
E.
heck yeah. And how did we arrive at this? What is twice 3? No, that is clearly not the right answer. What is twice 5?
10.
Infinity, that's right. So now we're going on up to 11. 11, again, is kind of an F. What's 12? You can do 12.
G.
J, J, J. So you can see when the horn players are playing this part of the partials, you can play all those steps, right?
Yes.
Okay, there. That was 12. Okay, 13 is, they just get really close together until they get to 16. And what would 16 be? C. C. All right, now the characteristics of a sound are what is the fundamental and the amplitude of the other partials. Okay, so why an oboe sounds like an oboe is because of the strength of the partials above that are sounding when you play the horn. So if you play the oboe, it's having all of these sympathetic vibrations that are lesser than the fundamental pitch that they're playing. That's why a trumpet sounds different than a violin. But something more important happens there is a lot more harmonic information at what part of the sound would you say?
Higher, lower, 1 to 2.
What is a sound? There's an attack, there's a sustain, and there's a decay. What has the most harmonic information? What is the juiciest part of the sound? The attack. Because if you cut the attack off and just play the sustain, many instruments sound very similar. But it's the attack that characterizes the sound. Okay, so what were we talking about? Horn, fifths. Now what would happen with the horn players is you would get this situation here between the horn parts, because they're mainly, back in the olden times, the horns and the trumpets and the timpani basically did the same thing, which was play tonic and dominant. Okay? The trumpets were natural 2, and the timpani usually two drums. Okay, so as you can see, this in fact is a direct fit, is not it? Yes, it is. It is. That's a direct fit. We don't usually count that if the soprano is stepping. And that is because this is what is called horn fits. Okay? Now, what we have been discussing lately I like to do this when I discuss building sounds with synthesis. You can use additive synthesis by putting together sine waves, which is a pure tone. There is no true sine wave in reality. The closest thing would be what instrument? Flute. The flute is the closest to the sine wave. Okay, but if you put a bunch of sine waves together, that's called additive synthesis. If you take a complex sound and filter out parts of the sound, that's called subtractive synthesis. Okay. All right. That's really probably enough on fits. This should just be our daily fit.
Infinity signs.
That. Okay. I'm obviously not a rich person. I mean, I do rock that 2005 Solara I'm on. It's a convertible. Okay, you want to have a quick test? Let's do it. But it's more like a fun thing. We won't count it as grades, but you have to kind of monetize things to make it worth your while.
I can agree.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's reverse monetized. Things cost every second you sit here you have paid for, or someone has, but it's still you. You are the government. Okay, in 273, in the first phrase, which we're going to count as what happens between the beginning and the fermata, tell me something, I don't know, let me pass out the rest of the papers, and then I'll give you your mission if you choose to accept.
What if your mission is to not accept this mission?
There's the door. Okay, 273. Let's get on the same page. We're on the front side, the printed side, on the second example that has 273 beside it. We all together there?
Yes.
Great! Now, between beginning and the cadence, I wanna find something special. Tell me something special. This is written by J.S. Bach. I wanna see if anybody can tell me something really cool. Huh? About the part writing. I wanna know something about the part writing.
It's cool.
It's in D.
The tenor and the alto.
Okay, let's go through it together, and we'll get more towards the part that I'm looking for. Since we have a whole two measures to examine here, let's Let's see if we can help you out.
There's a lot of times.
First,
Yes,
go ahead.
There's cross voicing.
Okay, that's not really unexpected, and unless you just treat them as the opposite voice for that point. The only time cross voices really makes a difference in your thinking is when the tenor would cross the bass, and then the tenor is the bass in your part writing at that point. So a lot of times you will see cross voicing. This is like one level up from your BVLP. It's like the first level of instrumental elaboration, but it's actually choral elaboration. As you can see, there's passing tones and other exciting things like that. So that is one level above your basic voice leading pattern. So cross voices do happen, and particularly in that beautiful contrary way. And I'm going to say that's a good first start. First pickup there is, one, passing tones to, okay, we want to be where here. Now look at what the A is doing in the current alto. It looks like we could form a chord, but not really that successfully because we have two D's and a B and an A. My thought is, what is the A? First thing, is it approached by step or obliquely? It is approached obliquely, and it resolves down by step. Yes, that's often thought of as a suspension type figure. Okay, could we understand that as a suspension?
Yes.
Now, if you added that G in the alto back to the original collection of notes, you would have a 4/6 chord, right? With a 7/6 suspension on it. What is the outlier here is the tenor changes. So it's still a 7/6 suspension.
Passing tone.
Well, it does form an interesting thing in that it is an EGB chord at that point. EGB, but that would be a 2/6/4 chord. So any way you look at it, it is something passing there. All right? Are we together there?
Yes.
There is some mystery there in the middle of that, but not the mystery I'm looking for. Then, in my mind, the A on the second beat in the bass could in fact